Now, if that doesn't call in a big buck, I don't know what does. And I, in fact, don't know what does. I am no expert on deer calls, but I get this question a lot. When do I use deer calls? What ones do I use? That sort of thing. It is something that I think is a pretty powerful weapon in the arsenal for us as crossbow hunters, the deer call. And there are numerous kinds of deer calls out there. My point with this video is just going to be to sort of discuss the various options out there and the times of year that you would use them and what you would hope to accomplish with each of them. What I want you to do, friends of Bunjie, is comment on this video. What do you have success with? When do you have success with it? And how do you use it? That's what we want to know. So I kind of want to make this video sort of a database for friends of Bunjie so that every year people can come back to this video, hopefully, and we've got sort of a database of everybody's opinions, and you can go through and mix and match and pick out what's going to work for you. And hopefully I'll get a little better at this also by reading your comments. The bottom line for deer calls for me is to have fun. Now, you saw Genevieve and I experimenting with our Sika deer calls. That's a whole different animal. We're not going to talk about that. If I'm a novice at deer calls, then I am definitely an amateur when it comes to Sika deer calls.
There you go. This is the weirdest video we've ever done.
But that was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun with that video, a lot of fun with those hunts, and a lot of fun with those calls. And that's really what this is about. There's a handful of different kinds of calls, and they serve different purposes, and they work in different situations, and they don't work in other ones, okay? I'm starting out here with the flex tone. This is my grunt tube. A lot of different varieties of this. I really like this one because it's easy to find in my backpack. It's pretty big. I drop it in like this, and I can reach it, feel it, pull it out of the backpack, use it, put it back in the backpack. That's important because I've had some of these before, didn't sound quite as realistic to my ears anyway, and they also were harder to find, to get in my backpack and I can't find them. You need this on a moment's notice because what this is an attention getter, and it's multiple kinds of attention getters. You see a deer moving off in the distance, but it's not coming your way, you want to give it a quick grunt. Just to say, hey, I'm over here. Right? That's your quick grunt. Now this one is adjustable by pushing down on this or this. And this is a flex tone bone collector series. They don't make it anymore. If they did, I would buy a handful more of them because I really like it. It's nice and loud. On windy days, volume matters. Okay. On a subtle day, when it's not real windy and the woods is real quiet, then you don't need all the volume covering up the speaker here, right? Like that. And then on a blustery day, I can really blast it. With these little buttons right here, you can push doe, higher pitch, and you can do fawn. You know, the real high, whiny little vibrate. And I can tell you, I've heard fawns make that sound when they're looking for their mother. You know, they're off over here, the mother's over there. You can hear them make those sounds. And if you're trying to hunt does and you want to call in a doe, make that sound. And a little, just a short little, and you might get a doe to come in and check and see whose fawn is lonely, right? The doe, I like to call in bucks with that higher pitch, because that will, you know, if you're trying to call in a buck, maybe you don't want the loud volume, the deep sound of the buck. This is a real heavy, throaty buck. And it might be too much for some bucks. It might discourage some bucks from coming in. That's my thoughts. Prove that? I don't know, right? Don't know. But really, this is just a locator to tell other deer, hey, come over here. Now, if you're rattling, you might want to do a longer grunt, a more aggressive, you know, something like that to tell the other bucks, hey, I'm over here, but you don't want any of this. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe that's the message that sends. This also has one other deer call on it, which I love, which is appropriate for getting a buck's attention, and that is the snort-wheeze, right? And that's blowing through here. If you look, there's a reed in here, okay? And there's no reed in here. So this wheeze, that snort-wheeze, is you're just blowing through there. Now, it's not that loud. And the snort-wheeze is really kind of a loud call. When would you use these? I would say that short grunt, whether it's the buck, the doe, maybe even the fawn, You can use those throughout the season, probably the fawn earlier in the season, because as the late fall approaches, I'm thinking those fawns are going to get a little throatier, a little bit heavier. Their voices are going to change, so to speak. So you might abandon that. And that's maybe an early season thing, to bring in a doe, to shoot a doe in the early season. The doe call, when bucks are active, when they're on their feet, you call in a buck with that maybe. And then probably around October 31st, right around Halloween, that's when the wood starts to fire up, at least in my neck of the woods. And from that, in the first 2 weeks of November, you're probably going to be using the doe call a little bit, and then those grunts, and maybe doing a little bit of rattling too, which we'll talk about in just a second here. When we talk about a snort-wheeze, I actually bought a snort-wheeze call. What do you think of that? High end. It's, which sounds the same as this, which sounds really the same as, which really just sounds the same as, they're all the same sound, like pretty much. So don't go buy in one of these. I bought it. First time I blew on it, I thought it had a reed that you had to activate, and it wasn't making any sound. So I blew on it really hard and about blew my cheeks out, because it's just, all it is a tube. That, you know, that's all it is. I don't think you need one of those. But if you got one and add on your grunt tube, that's pretty nice. You know, that does sound pretty good. The next one we'll do in companion with that, when you're grunting and trying to bring in a buck to a decoy, right, that's got antlers, or if you're trying to bring in a buck just with rattling horns or whatever, you need something to rattle. You can get horns. Problem with horns for me is they're big. You got to carry them in. You're going to smash your fingers on them. They are really obvious in a tree stand. They take up a lot of room, and the deer's going to see you moving around the tree stand, and it's not realistic, and I don't see any reason to have those. They make other ones. I bought this. This is a Hunter Specialties. I like that company. I always like them. And now I know why, because I've had this for years. But this is just hardwood blocks of wood in a little, you can make one of these easy enough, but right, that's your 2 bucks fighting. Now in a tree stand, you're still making a lot of movement, right? And on the ground, you still got a lot of movement going on with this. So you got to be careful about that. But what you do have with this is volume. They make littler ones where you're just rotating them, and you can be real subtle with it. It doesn't take up as much space. The problem with the subtler ones is that on a windy day, and in the fall, the wind's picking up maybe, but the leaves are off the trees, so you just have a lot more wind, it seems like. And that volume becomes important to me. It needs something loud, right? We need something that's going to cut. And a deer will hear that. I can guarantee you a deer is going to hear this thing through the woods. That combined with the occasional grunt, then rattle, then that'll bring in a big buck, perhaps. Especially if you got something to complete that image, which is the decoy out there in front of you. If you set that up, you got the sound of this, you got the grunting. Somebody will come in and check it out. In my experience with these, you know, and I don't hunt in necessarily the most robust areas for deer, right? I'm not hunting in the Midwest or anything like that. But if you're hunting Kansas with this sort of setup, it's probably a lot more effective than it is where I hunt. I tend to pull in small deer, young deer with this. But the predominant number of deer, most of the deer where I'm hunting are small deer. So like the mature deer are fewer and farther between. It's getting better though over the years. Then we have does, right? The estrus bleats and all that stuff. I love the Primos, the original can. This thing, you can do a long one or a short one. Not the loudest thing in the world. You got to wait for the wind to die down, do it at just the right time. You can do one of those if you want, mix it up. Read up on it and see which ones work for which. I do shorter ones, right? Because I can tell you in my experience in the woods, very rarely do I actually hear deer. I really don't hear rattling in the woods, right? And again, different places with a lot more deer, a lot more competition. If you're killing more does and increasing your buck to doe ratio, so it's closer to that 50-50, then the buck's got to compete a little bit more. Then you're going to hear more rattling, right? Rattling is going to become more effective because you're going to have more deer fighting. I don't use the can until after Halloween, but starting right after Halloween, the occasional one of these. And I can tell you with all of these, it is not my primary hunting strategy. I always have them with me. I have a can, a rattle bag, and a grunt tube with me. I have this with me all year long because this one, you never know when you're just going to want to go and pull somebody out of the trees over to check out your location. These cans I'm a lot more sparing with. I only use them for about a 1 week period, and that is Halloween to November 10th or so. That's about the time of year that I would use this. It's about 10 days. Give it one of those. Now, Primos, they make other ones, right? This is the original can. This is just the Primos original can. There is the great big can from Primos for that real long bleat. You ever spine shoot a deer? It sounds like that, to be honest with you. The young doe estrus bleat. That's a nice one. You can do that and bring in that younger, if you got younger bucks and you're trying to bring in a buck or whatever. But an old mature buck will respond to that as well, if they're going to respond to one. The long can, that one is longer, more intense estrus bleats, great for all phases of the rut. But I really like, if you got to have one, the original can is perfect. I think the other ones are just made, once you have the original can, they already sold you the original can, what more do you need? So they sell you these other ones, or sell me these other ones, so that I feel like I'm got all my bases covered, I guess. But the reality is you probably only need the one can. To be honest with you, each of these calls, I tend to make them not my primary hunting strategy. I tend to use them only when I am getting bored and I haven't seen any action. So I use the call to see if I can change gears a little bit. So, you know, they're not my primary weapon of choice, so to speak. When we're close to Halloween, I'm doing more bucks fighting each other concepts, right? That kind of sound, that's the image that I'm trying to create out there. And then the theme as the rut kicks into full swing, we get closer to November 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th, around there, then I'm switching to more doe sounding imagery. Fighting at the beginning and really attractive does, you know, toward the end of the rut. And then the rest of the year, I'm just, you know, this guy. That's it. Please leave some comments. Let others know your thoughts and questions. People, if you see questions on there, be very kind and respectful and helpful and answer those questions. Get people some good information in the comments of this video. Until next time, all hail Bunjie.